Roadman, you're going to absolutely love today's conversation with Mr. Dan Bigham. We sit down for a wide-ranging conversation. We talk about his world aero record, the techniques and tactics he used to change the aero game, his recent move from Ineos Grenadiers over to one of the biggest teams in the world, Red Bull. And we talk about how you, the average everyday rider, can eke out some extra aero gains from your setup. I'm excited to dive in, Mr. Dan Bigham. Dan Bigham, welcome to the Roadman podcast.
Awesome to have. This would be a long, really. It's one I've actually listened to quite a few episodes. It's one I guess we've had in the pipeline for a good amount of time and not managed to find the time. So awesome to be up.
Yeah, it's nice for anyone watching on video as well that we kind of have matching moustaches at the moment.
I think that's more my laziness post-Olympics to look after myself. I can barely ride a bike at the moment, let alone shave my beard.
It's a good club to be in, though. I had Valtteri Bottas was on as well, and we started the podcast talking about moustaches. So we're in a solid moustache club.
My mum was kicking off about it the other day. FaceTimed her to show Theo off. He was starting to walk it. Yeah, get stick for a moustache.
I think one of the first times we were going to do the podcast and it fell through was you were having the birth of your first child.
Yeah, just over a year ago now. He's moving quickly. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a very awesome experience. You obviously learn on the fly and they're challenging little things and every week's different, every day's different, every night's different. But it's really rewarding. And at that point now where he's, crawling around, walking around, and generally he's like a person, albeit a very little one. And that's really fun, really rewarding.
Have you started thinking about how aerodynamic you can make a balance bike?
So literally just yesterday we got what's called a globber, which is like a bike scooter hybrid thing. And absolutely, you start to think about those little things, don't you? And there's some really cool balance bikes. Like, honestly, the market has like some really good engineering. But
Specialized to a carbon one.
I see. Not cheap, though. But maybe the whole new job might help there.
Yeah, there you go. The big bucks. Is it frustrating? I was doing a little bit of prep for the podcast and, obviously, we've been in kind of parallel ecosystems. We've even raced against each other down in beautiful Kerry in south of Ireland and Rossmown before. But I just, Googling your name and checking around. And one of the things I've seen coming up a couple of times is people going, you're only fast because you're aero. And I thought that's the weirdest thing to ever say because it's like, you can only climb well because you're light. Like, what a bizarre statement.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot in many different iterations. There was one that, I don't know who said it, but it was relayed to me by Mehdi Cordy back when he was at British Cycling. Something like when we kind of broke onto the scene of like, they might be aero, but everyone will catch back up anyway. And thankfully it kind of went the other way that I caught them on the physiology and kept moving forward on the aero side that they didn't particularly catch up. Although it was that point in time when aero just became a bit crazy. And it is one of the reasons I'm fast. I mean, I'm not a terrible athlete. I still push decent watts, but I'm definitely not your top tier Grand Tour winner kind of guy. I'm probably a bit more closer to your keen amateur and sort of threshold numbers and sprint numbers, but just very good on the aero side of things. Yeah,
no, it's the weirdest criticism I've ever heard. You're only fast because you're aero. But let's dive into some of that stuff because the aero to me is super exciting as, you're an athlete. And I don't know who's putting these comments up, you're only fast because you're aero, because you had the world aero record. Like I've literally never spoke to somebody who's ridden a bike further in an hour. Like 55.5 kilometers is ridiculous. The Irish aero record's like 47 kilometers or something, which we might put a pin in that and come back to it because I'm tempted by that. But the aero stuff is moving so fast. Like I was looking at speed suits the other day. What's your thoughts on this Vortex dual layer skin suit? Is it bullshit, or maybe even give us some context as to what it is for someone that doesn't know what we're talking about?
Sure. It's firstly, it's absolutely legitimate. Skin suits are a really interesting area of research. So the Vortex whole product line really has been, you could argue, say it's evolution since like Beijing and London. So the guys behind it, primarily Rob Lewis, he was one of the secret squirrels back in the day, to developing alongside like Sally Cowan, who was the seamstress, obviously Chris Baldwin, etc. So they were doing a lot of the development around all the textiles, and they had the whole plastic suits, or whatever your rubberized suits, back in sort of London and Beijing. And then for Rio, they came up with this technology of basically like a dual layer. So in simple terms, there's a base layer or a bottom layer, and then there's a top layer. And in between, they just put ribs, different sizing, spacing, geometries. And what that does is interacts with the air flowing over the surface and without going too much detail, helps to keep the flow attached for longer around your body in specific areas where that's required. So predominantly it's basically like your upper arm and your lower leg. They're kind of the areas where you can have good impact with these kind of fabrics. And yeah, it can be really significant. The really interesting bit and the advantageous bit of the whole dual layer technology is there's more variables to play with than say a single layer, because you can change the material, you can change how it's woven, you can change the tension of it, you can change the rib size, the rib spacing, the rib geometry, and all these things kind of interact. That means you can really optimize for a specific rider in a specific position at a specific speed. And that's kind of the way that aero is generally going. Like, we've made big improvements, and those small refinements really just come from individuality, which is Vortex offering. Basically, you pay them not an insignificant amount of money, and they'll make...
It's like $3,000 for a speed suit.
Yeah, $3,000. And if you go for their full R&D process, I think it's like 8, 9, 10 grand maybe for the whole package. But they'll make like 20 skin suits. You'll go to the wind tunnel, you'll test them all, and you take the fastest one home that day. And if you don't make a significant improvement, I think it's something like a 2% or 3% like promise, you can go home and not pay a thing, which is pretty cool.
But is one of the benefits though, because I've used the base layers that like from Rule 28 and stuff that have the ribbed base layers. Now I have a friend who works with a different clothing company, and he was telling me in the wind tunnel that they're kind of strange, because if you don't fit the skin suit properly over it, there can actually be a time penalty rather than a time saving. Is the benefit of the Vortex this suspended layer, so we don't have those fitting problems with the base layer?
Yes.
Or is that a very simplistic look at
it?
No,
it's definitely a good way of explaining it. So with Vortex and other brands, they basically sandwich the base layer into the suit, so you can't not fit it correctly. I mean, there's other advantages to what Vortex do. They full 3D scan you and use some computational draping technology to tell you exactly what your perfect pattern is, to have the right tension all over your body, where the seam should be, things like that. So it's not this, it's just money for old tat. It's really interesting, cool technology, but you can achieve a lot of it, or go a good way towards achieving that kind of performance with like a Rule 28 base layer, or like I say, there's lots of other brands out there doing it, but you have to do your testing, because if not, you can end up in a worse situation.
And their website saying it has omnidirectional drag reduction. I don't know what the hell that is, but if I say it fast enough, I sound really smart.
I think that's Chris Beck getting carried away with his marketing speak. What do they mean by omnidirectional? Maybe it's a your angle thing. Maybe it's a fabric orientation
That's what
thing.
I was figuring.
It's not something I would use in my marketing lingo, but yeah. I don't believe they need to. I'm really anti-marketing. I hate it as a thing. Like, as an engineer, I just buy, if something makes sense that it's going to be fast, I'll go buy it. You don't need to tell me 20 different ways in a load of big words because you've eaten a thesaurus. Like, just if it works, it works. But like for my company, Watch Shop, it's a real challenge, because I'm just like, well, it's a good product, should sell itself. But unfortunately, marketing does work. I think like most of us who worked in that arena recognize that.
Yeah, like I think about it as like, it's that somebody wants your product. Like, there's different customers, isn't there? There's me geeking out because I used to have a marketing company. Like, there's someone that knows they have a problem and they know you're a solution. But there's another group of people out there that they have a problem, but they don't know you're the solution. So marketing kind of bridges that gap. For instance, like your Kratos crankset, did I pronounce that right? So that's working by reducing the Q factor, and then you're getting aerodynamic gain because the Q factor is reduced. Most people listening to this don't know what Q factor is. And so they're like, whoa, I can reduce my Q factor. What the hell is that? So that's an example of bridging that gap, this conversation now, because everyone's going to go and check out, what the hell is this? So explain that crankset to me and how it does that.
Sure. So that product came about, I think our first prototype was 2019, back in 2019, with the Who Bike track team. And it just came about through track testing, where we were looking at like what's sensitive, like what, if you change something, is it better or worse, or is it neutral? And there's tons of things you can change that don't really impact your performance. And there's a few things that you tend to find with individual people, and sometimes for everybody, if you change even a little bit, it's like a huge benefit. And Q factor, which is effectively your foot spacing laterally, if you bring that in, the vast majority of people see a huge improvement in aerodynamics. So like a 10 millimeter change in Q factor, so literally 5 millimeters per side, could be about a 1.5% drag reduction, which is like not an insignificant amount of watts. We're talking like 2, 3, 4 watts, depending on your speed. And the Kratos crank, and it depends on what you're going from and to, but you can get like 10, 15, 20 millimeters, depending on your bottom bracket spec of Q factor reduction. And then that means you get 0.02, 0.3, 0.4, which could be up to individual pursuit speeds. You're talking 10 watts or so even. It's really big, really big.
But when we're buying this stuff, Dan, and say, we go onto your website and we buy something like this that has a wattage claim on it. Like, I often wonder if you sort of a stream analogy, is that an upstream decision that has downstream consequences, the positive or negative? Like if I change my Q factor and I buy this off the website without having access to aero testing, does this, as an extreme example, I don't know, pop my head up a little more and now I'm less aerodynamic because of it? Or how, how do we differentiate stuff that we can just take the claims about wattage gains on face value versus the stuff where if we take the face value claim, it's going to have a downstream consequence that may be a penalty?
Yeah, I guess there's kind of two questions there. So the first one is I hate wattage claims. I just dislike those kind of claims in general because a lot of these solutions are individual. So the result that I would get if I changed the helmet or a skin suit or a wheel or a crankset would be different to yours. Hopefully on the majority of it should be similar, but it might not be. And how do you therefore advertise an improvement? Because you, as an engineer, you do the best you can to develop a faster component, but it might not work for everybody. And it might be amazing on some people and terrible on others, or it could be mediocre for everybody. It could be a slight improvement. It could be only work in certain conditions at high speed or high yaw. And therefore, how do you really market that? How do you say it's X watts faster? Or it's X watts in a certain scenario or on this test person or on our test cohort of 10 riders? It's a really frustrating area. And there's not like a generally agreed approach to how the sport should market that. So there's people claiming stuff at like 70, 80K an hour for aero, and that's really not relevant for 99.9%.
Yeah, I think customers are getting a little bit more, wide to that, like, because we're seeing these brands, wheel brands talking about wattage gains, and everyone's kind of waking up to going, is that at 80 kilometers an hour at a very specific yaw angle that I'm actually never going to ride in? And they just tested that in the wind tunnel. Or you see frames that are aftermarket, like full production ready frames in the wind tunnel, and they're testing them. I'm like, how are you testing it if it's full production ready? Like, it's already been sprayed and marketed, and now you're bringing it to test it. It's like, it's a bizarre, like, marketing chain or a supply chain.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of manufacturers releasing as much data and much information about their protocols as possible, because then it, like a keen consumer like yourself, can go and try and understand it, because it's not super complex. It's not beyond the will of man for any of us to try and understand a bit of this and to plug the numbers in and say, well, actually, okay, they've claimed it at 50K an hour, but if you normalize it for my road race speed or triathlon speed of 40, 45K an hour, it's actually slightly less, or they've only tested.
Especially because AI can help us with that now as well.
ChatGPT is awesome. I bloody love ChatGPT.
Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm using it to bridge that gap between me. My background's law. I'm not an engineer. I'd have friends and I'd be plaguing them with engineering questions, and their response now is just put it in ChatGPT. Put it in ChatGPT. It's like,
it does it for you. Oh, it's an absolute dream. The problem is, I guess, when you put in like text in there, it does come back and it doesn't always read like you. That's what I've always found a bit frustrating. Then you kind of re-edit it again. It's like, well, I wouldn't quite say it like that. But from like an engineering perspective, what's the equation for this? How do I recalculate the drag saving of this and that? It's amazing, really, in that respect. But yeah, to go back to your point, I think there are a lot more astute customers out there now, and the ability to test as well. There's a lot more independent test facilities. There's a lot of individual test houses, I guess, like ourselves or AeroCoach or whoever, who are testing components that aren't related to our businesses, like tires or drivetrain, maybe in some respects. You can then put the data out in the public domain, and that can be really helpful. Again, you kind of have to understand their protocols, the limitations of it, and that's not always super easy. But at least it's going in the right direction, that it's not just this black box anymore, that actually people can go out there and get some sort of fair, honest data.
Talk to me a little bit about wheels and tires. I spoke with Matt Bottrell not too long ago on the podcast, and we only had time to scratch the surface of this. He was saying now a lot more of the trend is going towards the whole tire, wheel, frame, body, like looking at the totality of the whole system rather than objectively saying, hey, these are the fastest wheels or these are the fastest tires. How do you think about that whole setup now?
It's probably the biggest area of low-hanging fruit in current performance. The primary thing is the tire, because it doesn't just do rolling resistance or just do aero or just do grip or just do damping. It does all of the above. And the directions you go in for one optimization is not the same as another. And then, like you say, you add in the wheel, you add in the frame, you add in the rider, you add the course, the conditions. Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it hilly? Is it cobbly? All that kind of stuff. It's a huge optimization problem. And with my time at Ineos, we spent a lot of time and resource developing the simulation software with all of those equations built in, where you could literally set up your course with all of our tires, all of our tire pressures, all of our wheels, press go, and it comes out and goes, okay, this is the time that you would ride with all of the possible setups that we have, and therefore your fastest setup is X. And that's kind of the level that you have to go to now, at least at the World Tour, if you genuinely want to compete. But then you can use that to then feed into your development cycle. So if you know that you're going to experience certain conditions, you can optimize around those kind of conditions as a manufacturer. But the interactions are huge. So what tire you pick on the wheel, a 25 might work great on one wheel and absolutely terrible on another, or 28, or a certain type of tire. So like you have vulcanized tires like your Schwalbe and your Continentals, and you have, you call them like open tubular, like your cotton sidewalls. So your Vittorias, your Specialized, etc. And they perform very different aerodynamically, but they also perform very different from a rolling resistance perspective. And then it comes down to calculating the delta between the two. If one's really bad at high yaw but really good at rolling resistance, is it faster? Is it slower? It's a bit of a minefield, because you've got to understand all those aspects of your optimization equation. But also it's pretty cool at the same time.
And is there a way for a lay customer to start getting, like, you had the might of Ineos and now you're moving across to Red Bull, which they're running Specialized. Oh, Specialized need a new tyre, actually. Turbo Cotton must be 10 years old.
12, I think. London 2012 was when it was first used. 12-year-old tyre.
Yeah, they need a new tyre.
Yeah, no comment. Don't know. Yeah, actually, I'm just joking. I don't know. I think she started a week ago. I have no idea.
But like, how do we start to make sense of that? As for me, next year, we spoke a little bit off air. I'm going to come back, start training really with this kind of idea of how good can a shit cyclist be if they have access to all the best minds in cycling, with John Wakefield coaching me, doing Hexus, doing nutrition. I'm sure I'll pick your brain a bit on aero stuff. But how does your lay person that doesn't have access to a World Tour infrastructure start to make tyre choices and wheel choices?
Yeah, it's a problem, but not one that's insurmountable. So I think firstly, using a good simulation software packages that are available, Best Bike Split, Aero Tune, they're probably the two primary ones out there that you can put data in. You can say, these are my CRR values, this is my CDA yaw curve. Those are the kind of inputs that you can put in, and you can use that to simulate your time trial, assuming you're doing a time trial or a triathlon. Road racing's a little bit harder because of a lot of complexities of you kind of riding in a bunch, and then maybe you're not because you're attacking or climbing. But anyway, we'll stick with TTs for now.
Or dropped.
Or dropped. Try not to be dropped. Find out before your race is run. Who cares what tires you're running? But basically, it then comes down to taking either independent data or manufacturing data, throwing it into ChatGPT and saying, this is the time trial I'm running, this is the data, it was calculated in this way. Can you normalize it for my speed, my weight, etc.? Get those numbers out. And it is an equation of what's really, of like how much rolling resistance difference will you see, and what aero difference will you see. There's a little bit of weather thrown in there as well. So you need to then look at how that tire wheel behaves at yaw, and either you've got to go and get that data yourself at a wind tunnel, or you hope the manufacturer supplies it. And to be honest, quite a few are. Parkour's released some really interesting data just this week on, I think they had 5 or 6 different tires on a load of their wheels. They've gone to the tunnel and looked at how they all perform, and the data is freely available. And that's just kudos to Parkour's. Suicide do something similar. A lot of the manufacturers out there are being a bit more open-minded because they accept that the customer wants this information and needs this information to make an informed decision. But the long and short is it's not a quick thing. It's not an easy thing. You need to invest time. But then if you do that and your competitor doesn't, you've got an advantage, and all of that for you.
A big unknown for a lot of us with this homemade bro science equation we're trying to run, it's our CDA, because most of us haven't been to the wind tunnel. Have you played around with stuff like Ghibli and these home aero sensors? And if so, how accurate are they?
I guess it depends what you want. Do you want accuracy, which in itself is a pipe dream for pretty much any setup, myself included? I'll try and explain why in a second. Or do you want the ability to test the differences between different setups? Because they're kind of a bit like different things. Do you want to know exactly what your CDA is, or do you want to know that X is faster than Y?
So is this like when parameters came out at the start and stages was massively, like it might have been 2% different to SRM, but then they started getting it where it was quite repeatably wrong, so you could, it still was a useful tool.
Yeah, exactly that. I think predominantly the vast majority of people don't need accuracy. they need to know is product X better than product Y? And sensors are starting to get there. There's still limitations. Primarily, actually, the two ones are ability to measure both accurately and precisely the airspeed and yaw angle. And then the second one is your elevation. Elevation is like such a huge problem that I don't think until you dig into it as a problem itself, it's one that you just assume is okay and we've figured it out. But like barometric altimeters, they can't measure to the level that we need. And then you're having to bring other sensors into the mix and get sensor fusion, or you're having to do certain protocols that mean you ride out and back multiple times on the same section and averaging the altitude out. But most sensors are getting to the point where they are useful for that. They will be able to tell you if one thing is faster than the other. I've worked a lot with Streamline. So John Buckley, I actually worked with him back at Mercedes Formula One in 2012, 2013. And then he's kind of gone and developed his aero sensor alongside Barney, who is aero sensor, which is a bit of a confusing name.
Yeah, I had Barney on the podcast, actually. He's an interesting guy.
Oh, really interesting guy. And obviously they split in part ways, but the technology they use is the same. And I'd say between those two, they're probably the ones leading, at least the commercially available sensors. There's a few other out there that I have a really good friend called Marco Manni. He's a Swiss aerodynamicist, works in wind power generation. He's designed and developed his own aero sensor. In fact, I've literally got it here. Which is quite a cool little thing.
It's like a
magic
it's
one.
like those medieval games where you're on a horse and you like lance at someone.
But it's a really cool sensor. I mean, it's pretty simple in how it's made it. But the good thing is that it moves the probe out of most of the static pressure interference of the rider. So when you're riding along, there's a big pressure front in front of you that your body is creating. And the further you can move that out of that, the less interference there is, because there's a lot of speed sensitivities to that interference. And also how you move your body, if your head comes up or head comes down. So it's ideal to move it farther forward, but that's a hard thing to do for like a commercial product. How do you make it rigid and held in place a meter or a meter and a half in front of the rider? So it's a problem, and they're all trying to tackle it in different ways. But I'd say most sensors now you can get good data, and then most of it then comes actually having a good power meter, because power is the key bit to this. And there are a lot of crappy power meters out there. It's been like a race to the bottom for the past 10 years. Who can make the cheapest power meter, not who can make the best.
Yeah, I remember my first power meter, and I've told this story before on the podcast. I was 2005, I'm going to say, 2006. I was an undergrad in university, and I knew I hadn't got money to pay every month for a coach, but I was starting to dig into some of the data and understand, how you coach an athlete. And I was like, I need to get my hands on an SRM, but it was like €2,500 at the time. So I falsified like a bank loan application, told them I needed a car to drive to uni. It took me 4 years to pay that back.
But it was worth it.
It was worth every penny.
Your data was beautiful. I love SRM for just how open it is. The fact it's literally just a frequency output from a strain gauge, and they'll tell you what the zero offset is and they'll tell you what the slope is, and you can check it. And yeah, it just works. They had a few flaws in the early days around temperature compensation because of the simplicity of it, which they've since addressed. But it's just a really good, clean system. And yeah, I highly rate SRM. I'd say they're pretty much market leading. There's a few others that are getting pretty close, and there's a few others that absolutely have gone the other way. And like I said, are a race to the bottom, and the error sources can be horrific. I think anything that's single-sided, you may as well just put in the bin. It's not worth it for error testing. You at the very minimum need dual-sided. You have to have a good power meter, really. At least if you want reasonably accurate results, which is obviously another point that we talked about. How much do you actually care about the absolute value? And people claim like my CDA is X or CDA is Y, and it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because if your power meter reads 10% high, your CDA will be 10% high. So it's more a case of...
We are so excited to announce that we are partnering with Whoop. Whoop are changing the game when it comes to wearable technology and health monitoring. Whoop is a wearable health and fitness coach that provides you with feedback and actionable insights into your sleep, your recovery, your training, your stress, and your overall health. Sarah and I have been using Whoop for years, and we love the insights it provides into our body's inner workings. It really gives us a look under the hood. And you're going to see Mathieu van der Poel, Richard Carapaz, and other elite level cyclists wearing Whoop. But it isn't just for those superstars. All the data is personalized to your unique physiology and fitness levels. If you're interested in taking control of your health and your fitness so that you can excel in all aspects of your life, you have to go and check out Whoop. Go to the URL now, which is join.whoop.com whoop.com/roadman. I'm going to pop that in the description below, and you're going to get a free month's access to Whoop membership on me. I promise you won't regret it.
Yeah, so actually talking to Yuli on the podcast next week, who's the founder of SRM, meant to be a super interesting guy. Never spoke to him before, just had a bunch of back and forth on WhatsApp. If you were going back, what year did you set up your Hub Watt Bike team? Was that 2016, 2015?
So it started off Team KJF, was back into 2016. We raced the Nationals January 2017. And then our first World Cup season was 2017, 2018. And then became Hub Watt Bike in 2018-19 season.
Like, that was insane. That was such a cool David versus Goliath story. Like, for anyone that didn't follow, like, it's worth going back to trace the evolution of that team and, you know, the shoestring budget you guys were on and the times you were putting down and beating, like, it properly was David versus Goliath. Like, you were coming up against the GB track squad and you're handing it to them. Like, but here's my question with that one. If you were to go back now with the benefit of, you know, bones of a decade of experience, training and racing yourself at the highest level and your aerodynamic experience, what would you change with that team now in the setup?
That's a really good question. I mean, more money would have always been helpful. So to give clarity, so our first year, our entire budget was £16,000. And that was registering the team, living. So this is accommodation, food, travel, logistics, equipment, training for a whole team of 16 grand. It was actually ridiculous. We were literally living in slums in the back end of Derby, like as poor students.
It's brilliant.
I loved it in hindsight. I mean, at the point in time, like, what we're doing, we're getting broken into every few weeks, but it was, yeah, you probably look back with rose-tinted spectacles, but it was really enjoyable. What would I do different? I probably actually, well, I mean, there's definitely a few things on the aero equipment front, but actually the biggest thing I would say is training consistency. And it's something that I think collectively we probably underrated as a team, of like that time of just doing good, consistent training and volume as well to a good degree. A lot of our approach was around intensity and replicating the demands of the event. We're doing a lot of team pursuits. Like, we'd go to a session and do 4 standing 4Ks, which is absolutely unheard of.
It's crazy.
Yeah, no one did that. And maybe in hindsight, it wasn't the ideal training because we were doing that once or twice a week. And yeah, it probably burned itself out. So yeah, I would lean towards just the training consistency and getting the volume in, because that's where the long-term improvements come. And that's one of the reasons that I've progressed and been able to do things like the hour record, because yes, my aerodynamics have improved, but physiologically I'm a better athlete than I was 6, 7, 8 years ago, whenever that was now. And even like the team suit backing it up. Like, if you look at competitions now, you go to the world champs, you qualify team suit, then 24 hours later you do the rounds, 6 hours later you do the finals, 12 hours after that you do the IP qualifying, 6 hours later you do the IP finals. So you're doing 5 rides in, give or take, 48 hours. And that takes that durability, that time of just consistent training to really manage. And that's what I lacked in the early days.
You guys definitely seemed like you were out ahead of the curve in terms of aerodynamics, but something that seems to have really been a priority for World Tour teams and looked like it was a priority for you for the aero record was heat dissipation. Do you think the next evolution in materials is my sort of where I'm coming from with this question is, it seems like gains in aerodynamics are going to get harder and harder to get because we've got the Pareto 80% of gains early in aerodynamics and they're getting harder and harder to find these. Are we going to find these next gains in heat dissipation?
Probably the trade-off between the two is the key bit, because at the moment, most of the fabrics that are really good at heat dissipation are actually terrible aerodynamically and vice versa.
Yeah.
The fastest suits are really uncomfortable to wear, especially for long durations and vice versa. So,
and same probably applies to helmets?
Yeah, same with helmets. I think predominantly, actually, I'd say the suits are more important. I think helmets are a mental thing. So they feel hot and you honestly, you do respond to what you feel, not to what actually happens. But once you kind of accept it's probably more of not placebo, but it is a mental game of the heat in your helmet. The actual cooling side is not that critical around your head. Most of the cooling is the big body mass that you've got. That's where all the energy is getting created. And hence why I like the hour record with hoofing down kilos of ice, because it's so easy.
Yeah, I couldn't believe how much slushy you drank.
I mean, Gannis was unreal. I think he was 2.2 kilos for his hour record of ice. She's just like, it's a lot of ice.
Who would have thought brain freeze was a problem for the hour record?
It literally was. Licking the roof of your mouth, and even that doesn't typically help a huge amount. But from a performance perspective, absolutely game-changing. So I think, yeah, to come back to your point, yeah, cooling is going to be a massive component of performance because like climate change, we can probably all accept as a thing nowadays. And everything's getting hotter, especially that really important race in the middle of July in France. It's absolutely cooking year on year and it's only going one direction. So the more we think about it, the more I think the performance is going to improve in those extreme conditions. And it's the training as well. Like, how do you adapt to that heat day to day? Like, it's something that you've got to be able to tolerate and not just be able to do once off. You've got to do it for 20, whatever consecutive days back to back. And it can really, can do a lot of damage, heat stress. So you've got to think a lot about it. And it's the preparation, it's the execution of the race, and it's the how you deal with that afterwards as well and getting your body back to a sensible temperature. And so you can go and sleep, really, because if you're cooking hot, it's going to wreck your recovery at the same time.
You think we can build cooling into the hoods on road bikes?
Depends a lot on the UCI and what they want us to do around like onboard technologies. I mean, I'm a big fan of increasing the weight limit. I think I've been, I've said it a few times, everyone's like, are you mental? We want super light bikes. It's like, well, do we? Like if you've got an 8 kilo bike, suddenly you can throw loads of cool technology out. Imagine like front and rear GoPro, all the like live onboard data, even like microphones in the Peloton, which I think probably a few people might be against. Like, I mean, you and I have both been in the Peloton. It's not always the most pleasant place. But like the insight from a fan engagement perspective would be absolutely game changing. And I'm an advocate for it with the UCI listening or not. We'll wait and see. But I think that would enable things like onboard cooling, which may become a necessity in 10, 20 years time. I don't know. But it's a hard thing to do efficiently in small things because effectively it's energy. So you like if you look at a fridge, it's cool on the inside, but it's hot on the outside, and it's the energy required to work a fridge pump, and same kind of concept. Hence why, to go back to the ice point, you're eating loads of ice, and it's the changing of the ice to a liquid. It's called phase change. It takes a lot of energy, and then they raise the temperature of that liquid, and then you sweat it out, and then changing to a gas, and again, that takes a lot of energy.
How much of your job as an engineer is trying to work within the UCI limits, and how much is there like a latitude for you petitioning or your team petitioning the UCI to change regulations?
Roadman, I'm going to date myself here, but I've been riding the bike for almost 20 years. And in that time, I've cycled through every cycling apparel brand out there. And I kept swapping out different apparel brands each season until I found Le Col. There's something really different about Le Col, and as soon as you slip into the gear, you notice it feels different, it feels better. I've had the pleasure of chatting with Yanto Barker on the podcast. He's the Le Col founder, and his dedication to crafting the fastest, most refined cycling apparel out there, it's nothing short of inspiring. Yanto isn't just trying to create gear. I get the feeling he's actively and obsessively trying to perfect cycling gear. Trust me, as soon as you slip on the Le Col kit, as soon as you zip up that jersey, you can feel that commitment. The proof for Le Col, it's in the pudding. This is the same kit that Jay Hindley wore when he clinched overall victory in the Giro d'Italia. There's a confidence that comes with wearing apparel that's been battle tested and podium proven in races like the Giro d'Italia. Trust me, feeling good on the bike means you're going to perform better. If you have a second, I highly advise you to jump on over to lacol.cc and check out their amazing range of kit and experience this feeling for yourself.
So proactive changing of regulations is pretty rare, I would say. It's something that I try to push for and I make suggestions, and there's kind of different avenues for that. I have a good relationship with Andre, who's now the head of the materials department. He took over Michael Rogers' role when Michael left. I'm trying to think when that was, probably 4, 5, 6 months ago now. But then there's another avenue, which is the World Federation Sporting Goods Industries. So they're like a lobbying group of all like the big sporting goods people within the industry. So like your Zips, your Vittorias and Continentals, Hoop, they actually on that committee. So I can kind of sit on those meetings, and then you can kind of influence, and the kind of a bit of give and take. So sometimes it'll be the industry saying, we don't like this rule, it needs to change, or it needs to go in this direction. Sometimes it's the UCI coming the other way of actually we want to try and ban this or change that or limit this. What do you think? How should that be done so that it doesn't ever really particularly come as a surprise, at least to the big players in the industry? Sometimes to the small guys, you're not really involved. And then often the UCI will approach the small people as well. So I've sat in meetings with like us, Aero Coach, Velo Bike, Ride Sim. So those small niche kind of startup brands of the last few years sitting there with the UCI talking about like cockpit designs, whether that's like drop bars, extensions, that kind of thing. And really on the track side, that's where most of the development's being done within those kind of small niche brands, which is pretty cool because your big players don't seem to get involved in that arena quite so much. So the hotbed of track aero is more the kind of niche designers, which is quite nice. But day to day, realistically, it's more about trying to work within the rules as they're written. And then the UCI typically will go, well, actually, that wasn't really the intent of the rule. We'd rather you didn't do that. And then you kind of have this to and fro of actually what's the intent versus what is the actual written rule, and where do we meet in the middle normally?
So I'm kind of big on my undergrads in economics before I moved across to law, and large parts of economics are based on incentives. And with the incentive for performance, we're so highly incentivized to eke out gains for speed, to eke out gains for aerodynamics, for grip, for rolling resistance. We're so poorly incentivized to innovate around safety. And that's why I would love to see that weight limit going up. And, as an ex-rider and someone who's a lot of friends still in the peloton, safety is such a huge problem. Gino passing away last year, there's bad crashes in, every country in the world at a local level every weekend. But there's so little innovation in terms of safety as well. Like, as an engineer, is that frustrating, or is it just you have to focus on what you're paid to focus on?
It is frustrating. It was actually one of the first discussion points I had when I went to meet Red Bull. One of the head senior guys at Red Bull was like, what do you think about safety in cycling? You're like, oh, caught off guard. Thought you might ask about skin suits. Yeah. But it's a genuine problem. How you tackle it, I think there's a lot of different ideas. I think a lot of it is going to have to force onto riders. I think riders right now are very anti things like, for example, like additional layers in your clothing that help when you crash to deal with road rash, etc. I think it was a survey done by the CPA, and most riders said, no, I don't want it. Which is kind of a bit like if you rewind decades when people are like, oh, do you want seatbelts? No, I'm fine. Yeah. It's like you get thrown from the vehicle, it's okay. It's like, well, no, it's not okay.
And that makes such a difference. Even like, I'm sure you've crashed with a base layer and without a base layer. Like, the difference in terms of road rash, it's insane.
Boom. But then it's the UCI who have to either regulate for it or encourage it. And quite often the opposite has happened. I've heard of manufacturers going to the UCI, do you mind if we put this in? And then they get the backup thinking, oh, maybe it's an aero intervention that we should ban. It's like, no, people being proactive on safety, but then the riders don't want it because it's 50 grams heavier. And it's like, how do you tackle that? Weight limits.
Yeah.
But it's a big old problem. I mean, there's other things, isn't there? Like how safe are descents, catch nets, pre-warnings. We just had crash out with Vuelta when he was on his way to win probably a couple of jerseys. And that was a corner that wasn't signposted, but was when they last used it a few years ago. And why has that changed? Because they clearly assessed it a few years ago and said, well, it's unsafe. Why is it suddenly okay now?
Yeah, and it seems like we've talked about ChatGPT. It seems like this is a paid ad for ChatGPT. We're mentioning it so much. But like a big data approach to this, it must surely be attractive as an engineer, where we look and we analyze every single race, every single crash that's happened, and start like penalizing races with poor safety records and incentivizing them to have safer corners, have more marshals on corners, route around, potential. If a crash has been on the same corner 5 out of the last 5 years, like, should that corner be in the race?
Exactly that. But it needs to be independent at the same time. I think Safer Cycling are maybe a group who are doing that, and they assess a lot of the races and then give recommendations to the organizer. The organizer isn't required to adhere to those. And I think it happened back at the big Exulia crash when Jonas and Remco, I mean, let's be honest, nearly died. They had some pretty serious injuries. And that was raised in the Safer Cycling report, but wasn't addressed by the race organizer. So again, it falls on this kind of like triangle of race organizers, independent safety, and the UCI to somehow regulate and say, you have to meet these. We've had it in other ones like sprinting. Was it Tour of Poland? They always had a stupid downhill sprint finish.
Stupid downhill sprint, where Jakobsen and Groenewegen nearly killed each other.
And yet, what happens? What changes? I might say it needs incentivizing, but it doesn't seem the UCI really take it seriously as a problem. Like bury their heads in the sand.
Even to bring this conversation full circle and wrap it up, we started out talking about your career, and definitely it's frustrating to me when people are like, oh, limited talent, got a lot out of himself. Like, exceptional talent and got a lot out of himself, I think, is a better way to categorize it. But do you have any regrets that it seems like now you're moving to Bora and your balance in elite sports days are maybe behind you, or do you have more ambitions?
No, I think you're right. Go to the Worlds in how many days? It says on my phone, 39 days. 39 days to Worlds, and that will probably be my last international event for GB. I mean, never say never. I could do like gravel worlds or esports worlds or something like that, but more for a bit of fun. Regrets. I think the one thing reflecting back on the Olympics is that because you were so close, you always wonder, like, should I have done something different? Like, should I have not done this or done a bit more of that or trained a bit differently? And I think hindsight's can be a wonderful thing, but also a frustrating thing at the same time, because especially when you want a different result, you find so many different ways that you could have improved. But at the same time, like, I've had what I think is quite a successful career, like national championships, European championships, world championships, Commonwealth Games medal, Olympic medal, world record, world hour record. It's been pretty awesome. You always you want more, like every rider does, but it's been amazing. And at the same time, like, I've missed out on so many fun things, not just in cycling, but in life. Like, I live in Andorra and it's a lovely place to be, but most of my family and friends are in the UK, and you miss out on family occasions and trips away and just the fun time with your mates. Like, even if it's down at the pub, or if you go on like a gravel adventure, and like stage racing as well. Like, I had a few years of being a continental rider, and they were such awesome experiences because you're not stressed about like super high performance. You just have like really fun experiences on a bike with your mates, and that's kind of what I feel I missed. And it's not a regret, it's just, I guess, more what I'm looking forward to in the future, that I can relax a little bit and not question every decision in my life. Is it going to make me faster or not?
It's a weird lens to run stuff through, and I haven't done this dance and tried to make World Tour and failed spectacularly, but for a long time, like, running every decision through that binary lens of, will this make me a faster bike rider? Like, I remember sitting in the cinema with my girlfriend at the time, like, eating spinach in the cinema. I normalized that at the time, like, thinking, no, that's normal. This is something people do. But so, especially with a French team now, like what we know about fuel and carbohydrate intake. But I was with a French team, and they were fanatical about weight. So, like, I'm walking around now, and I look like a pretty skinny dude, I'd say, walking around at 80 kilograms. I'm 68 in France. Totally hyper obsessed, and it's not a part of sport that anyone really gets to see unless they're high performance, but the opportunity cost to pursuing it, whether you make it or not, is quite high.
Yeah, and so many people don't make it as well, and they have regrets for what they have missed, because a lot of that period as well is your formative years when you're sort of 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I mean, I'm really glad that I went to university, and like the experience I had there were amazing, and they made me who I am. And I don't really regret the decisions I've made. And I'm quite glad that I approached cycling a little bit later in that respect. But nowadays, if you want to make it, you can't. You have to sacrifice those years. And if you don't make it, then it can be a bit of a frustrating existence. And even when you do make it, it's not that World Tour cycling is this lovely dream. Like, it is a hard existence. You ride your bike a lot, you travel a lot, you don't see your family and friends all that much. It can be quite challenging. And especially if you're not achieving the performance you want to, or you're in a bad team with a poor culture, it can be pretty down. I sound like I'm putting an absolute downer on it, but like, just to try and like lift the lid a little bit, that it's not all like champagne and roses and parties. It's hard work and a lot of travel, and can be pretty challenging at the same time.
Yeah, I think high performance happens in the shadows.
Yeah, nobody sees what happens behind closed doors, the work that goes into it, but they obviously see the output. And yeah, I think ideally it's something I want to do in the future a little bit more of. So I partnered with IMechE, which is the Institute of Mechanical Engineering, to kind of show what you study at school, how relevant that is to being a high performance practitioner. If you're an aerodynamicist or a nutritionist or an engineer or whatever role you have in a high performance environment, that what you learn is actually important, because that tangible link never really is discussed or shown in the public domain. So I'm hopeful to try and create a system or project that kind of shows that in a bit more detail, and with the partners and the teams that I work with, hopefully encourage them to do exactly the same, because I feel there's a big missing link there, and we're lacking in a lot of engineers and aerodynamicists within high performance sport across the board. So yeah, that's kind of a big ambition of mine.
I have the antidote to your high performance. I'm going to convince you to come bike packing with me next.
I'd be well up for that. Bit of fun.
It couldn't be less high performance. It's beers in the evening, and then you try and knock out 200k the next morning, hung over to shit.
That was actually on my post-Olympic agenda, and annoyingly didn't actually fit in. So I built a gravel bike literally 2 weeks before I went to the Olympics. And there's a 370k gravel loop in Norfolk where my wife's parents live, called Rebellion Way. And I've been keen just to like, firstly eye it up, check it out, and then hit it real hard for the fastest known time next year. So that's high on the agenda.
I got back 2 weeks ago. We went on Italy, Albania, Bosnia, Slovenia, Montenegro, Croatia, back in Italy, like on the beer every night, but then sort of 150 to 200k in the day then. But we tried to hit it pretty hard. Like so it ended up being more of team time trial during the day than it did. So
Real social.
whoever drank least the night before. So it's like 10-minute turns, 320 watts each, swinging off team pursuit style. You well fit in.
For 200k. Man, I've served my time. I don't need to do that.
My missus texts me going, "You haven't good fun." I was like, "We haven't talked to each other in 7 hours. Like, we're just doing your turn and get back in the wheel."
Well, it's time too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan Bigham, I've enjoyed this a lot.
Nah, it's been awesome. Thank you for that.
Thanks, buddy.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. And click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.